Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about JWST proposals and the timeline. I'm Jeff Valenti. I'm the JWST mission scientist at Space Telescope. There's lots of other mission scientists at other organizations, but that's my role. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Science Mission Office at Space Telescope, who are responsible for the proposal process for JWST, which we're all very interested in, right? This is my summary of the talk. I thought I'd start here just so you know where it's going. So I'm going to talk about GTO programs because they are going to do certain observations, and there's a duplication policy, which means you have to have a good reason if you're going to try to do what they're going to do. So you'll want to hear what is known about what they're going to do and what's coming up. Then I'm going to also talk about the Director's Discretionary Early Release Science proposals, which are being reviewed. This is going to generate some data that you might want to look at. It might be relevant if you want to do archival proposals or something like that. So you want to hear about that. Also, the same duplication issues apply there as well. And then finally, the Cycle 1 General Observer Proposal process. I'll describe that. And then I'll briefly mention the user committee. So that's the game plan. Here we go. Pierre took all the photos, so I don't have any photos. It's mostly just text, but there'll be more photos later. So one point I wanted to make, different observatories handle time allocations in different ways. For JWST, the Science Mission Office made the decision that we were going to allocate time in terms of how much time it takes to execute the program. It's not exposure time, it's how much time it takes to execute the program. And in addition to that, there's some generic overheads like instrument calibrations, which each program will pay a proportionate share for. If you have a big program, you'll get a bigger slice of that. If you have a small program, you get a smaller slice. So in JWST lingo, that's called charge time. And let me just make an aside that when I go looking for JWST documentation, I type into Google the magic lingo that I know, and everything pops up for me in the documentation. So it's good. I'll try to highlight when it's a lingo term, like charge time or something like that. So APT, the proposal tool, reports charge time when you build a program or a proposal. The TAC basically has a pile of charge time a quota that they can allocate out. The director will actually say, okay, well, here's your amount of charge time that you're going to get for your program. And then you actually don't pay what it really takes anymore. You pay what APT timing model says. I know that's a little weird, but we don't want to have to go back and do accounting after the observation. So there's a reference version of APT, which says this is how much charge time it's going to cost you to do your observations. You have to fit that within your quota, and you're good to go. From your perspective right now, focus on this is what the total cost of my program is, and this is what science I'm going to do, and that's what the TAC is going to judge. If you have questions and you want to interrupt, wave your hands vigorously, otherwise we'll have a few minutes at the end. All right. There are three categories of observing programs. There's the guaranteed time programs that I discussed. These are folks that help build the observatory. They've been working on the project for 15 years, roughly. They've invested a huge amount of effort, contributed greatly to the success of the mission. They have cumulatively 4,000 hours, roughly, which you'll see. They have to use it in the first 30 months. In fact, they're basically going all in Cycle 1, which is bad from the perspective of if you wanted more time for yourself, but it's good in the sense that they're going to get in there and they're going to understand all the quirks and report back to the rest of us what's going on. So we're going to understand the data much faster because they're engaging right away. So I'm very happy that they're going in right away. There's a director's discretionary programs. The director of the observatory has roughly 10% per cycle, up to 10% per cycle that he can award for whatever purpose. In Cycle 1, the director is allocated, we'll see later, I think it's 400, 500 hours, to an early release science program, which I'll describe in more detail. There are other flavors of director's discretionary time. You can say, hey, director, we should do this program now. And finally, there's the guest observer programs, which is what most of us will be proposing for. Open access, anybody in the community can apply. It's slated to get roughly 80% of the observing time over the first 5 cycles, the first 5 years of the mission's lifetime. About 6,000 hours will likely be approved in cycle 1. That's actually more, if you add in all the other pieces, than can be done in cycle 1. There's a little bit of maybe 20–25% oversubscription in cycle 1. That's to help us with the scheduling, to give us a little tail of programs to mesh with cycle 2. In future cycles, it'll be just the amount that we need to fill in that cycle. This is sort of a startup excess amount. So we'll get most of these programs done in cycle 1, but a few of them will tail off into cycle 2. All right, GTO programs. That was the first thing I was going to go through. Yeah, sure.
So if you have a successful proposal in cycle 1, but it doesn't get observed because of this issue?
Guaranteed to get your data in cycle 2, if that's the question.
Okay.
Yeah, the question was, what if it doesn't get observed in cycle 1? Do you just lose? And the answer is no. We'll get it done as soon as we can. Okay. Three-stage process for GTOs. Again, we're just getting perspective on the GTOs because you have to be aware of what they're doing so you don't duplicate it. They submitted a text description of what they were planning to do in an initial target list April of this year. They submitted specific observations, which you'll learn observations is a lingo term in JWST, something that you define in APT. So they described their observations, although, and that has been published. It's not the actual APT files yet. That'll come at the end of this year, just in time for the call for proposals that you guys are going to be responding to. So all of these resources will be available for you to look at and see what science are they trying to do. Maybe that'll give you some ideas. What are they looking at a target I'm thinking about looking at? How are they looking at it? Do I have to work around them or is everything fine? So I mentioned that I mentioned that they're using basically almost going all in the GTOs in the first cycle. The policy set in advance was they have to use at least a quarter of the time. They can't hold all their time back, and they can't take up more than 49% of cycle 1. And they're basically up on the upper limit of that, but within the range. And then I guess the only other thing I want to say is this table, which will be available to you, lists all the different investigators. There's some interdisciplinary scientists who are not involved in building the instruments, but sort of represent you in different science areas. There's the instrument teams that help build the instruments, and the MIRI team has a bunch of individuals that go along with it. And then just how many hours each of them are doing in cycle 1. Okay, so one nice thing, the GTOs, in order to help the community and the mission, are going to make some of their data available sooner than is required. So the nominal exclusive access period, that's another jargon term, exclusive access, which in olden days was called proprietary periods, but the new and improved jargon is exclusive access period. The nominal period is 1 year, and when you propose, that would be the nominal period. They have a contract that says they get it for 1 year, but purely to help facilitate proposals for cycle 2, to inform them. The GEOs, some of them are going to try to make some of their data available sooner. And so the NIRSpec NIRCam teams have a large program to study high redshift galaxies, and they're going to make some of that data available in a more timely manner. And similarly, Roger Windhorst has a North Ecliptic Pole survey, and he's going to make some of that data available. The description is not complete here. This is just to flag it so that if you're interested, you can go and look at the descriptions that have been published and will be published, the APT files that will be published, and maybe structure some of your proposals around that. All right, that was GTO overview. Now on to the early release science program. So it's 500 hours of discretionary time from the director. Part of the rules of the game here is 0 proprietary access period. It doesn't say it here yet. I guess it's going to say it in a moment. But the underlying goal of this early release science program is what I was hinting at earlier with the data that would be released early by the GTOs. The cycle 2, I know you guys are thinking about cycle 1, but we're already thinking about how is the community going to take what is learned in cycle 1 and use that knowledge to do the best proposals they can in cycle 2. And if you have a 1-year exclusive access period, that means the data is really kind of locked up, and everybody has, some people have little bits of information and other people have no information at all, right? So the golden thing to have right now in cycle 1 are programs that have as short exclusive access period as possible. So the director took some of his director's discretionary time and said, we're going to do some program here, early release science, 0 exclusive access period. You'll see later that this enables things like archival programs even in cycle 1 because we know these programs are coming and we know what's in them. So if you have a plan that the ERS team isn't planning to do, you can maybe leverage off of the ERS program. Similarly, there will be the duplication issues that I was mentioning. All right, let's see. Just to cover the things I didn't say here, there'll be up to 15 proposals selected. These have already been submitted, these programs. They're going to be selected not necessarily just to be the best possible science, but to demonstrate the capabilities of the instrument, to generate data sets and knowledge that can be shared with the community. The teams have a responsibility to give information back to the community to help enable them to do better science. Right. Okay, so here's the first, I'll show this twice. This is the first one. I'll go through it here. In the context of the early release science program, which is highlighted in red here, there was, the TAC is meeting next week. There was a proposal process that's off the end of the left edge of the chart here, where letters of intent were submitted, proposals were submitted, and so on. I'll tell you what happened then. But going forward, the time allocation committee, the TAC, for the ERS program is meeting next Monday and Tuesday. The results will be released shortly thereafter, so then we'll know what the actual ERS programs are. And then in December, shortly before the call for proposals for the GO program, the ERS APT files will be released. So then you can see all the details of what they're planning and fold that into your planning for your GO programs. Launch has slid in. There's this nice gap now that in the chart where we haven't filled it in with more tasks yet because the launch was delayed just a few, as Pierre mentioned. And then there'll be a couple workshops afterwards. And honestly, the details of those workshops are not clear, but the goal is to feed information back to the community, to feed information back to us at the Science and Operations Center to help us improve everything in time for Cycle 2 proposals, right? Okay. Let's see what else we have in this section. So there were 200 notices of intent submitted. 106 proposals were actually submitted. The previous slide said up to 16 will be submitted. So oversubscription is roughly a factor of 7. The average request was 30 hours per proposal. It covers a bunch of different science topics, solar system, planets and planet formation, stellar population, stellar physics, and so forth. Presumably your favorite topic is listed up here, or at least something close. The instruments, all the instruments were requested. I think you shouldn't take these numbers as suggestive of what will happen in the GO pool. I think on my side, everybody likes to look at these like tea leaves and try to guess what you guys are going to do. I think you guys should do, use whatever instrument is right for your science. Proposals came from all over the world, 15 countries with PIs or co-PIs, 38 countries with co-Is and collaborators, lots of states in the US. So as I said in the beginning, everybody's welcome to propose, and everybody does propose. Here's the breakdown on numbers of investigators and so forth. It's basically here in the package for you. It doesn't really impact your thought process for how you're going to prepare your proposals. As I said, the TAC is meeting. There will be 4 panels. The TAC process is kind of interesting because you have to try to guess what the TAC will be looking for when they look at your proposals. For the ERS proposals, there's 2 extragalactic panels with some subdivision of topics and 2 galactic panels with subdivisions of topics. And then there's a little bit of extra shuffling that goes on to avoid conflicts of interests. The panels have representatives from all of the collaborators in the mission, the ESA in Canada. The process that happened for the ERS is that there were preliminary grades submitted in 3 different categories. So this, you can imagine this might be how it goes down for the GTO. Well, actually, it'll be a little bit different for the GOs. But anyway, the effectiveness for preparing the community for cycle 2. As I said, that was the main motivation, so that was 1 grade. The utility of whatever products are going to be created and the robustness of the plan to create those products, and then the overall scientific merit of the program. So three equally weighted grades, right? There is a triage process. There was, and there will be probably for the GOs as well, where some initial grading goes on with a subset of the panelists for each proposal, and then the highest ranked proposals get discussed in detail by the panels, but individual proposals can still be rescued from triage. This is the same process that, roughly speaking, that is used in HST. The panel discussion is next week. There'll be 1 score, and the final discussion selection will be made soon. So I said that all twice, ERS programs. Right, so the key dates here are when the APT files will be released. I think the earlier slide said December 15th. This one says by November 30th. It said November 15th, right. So in November, the second half of November, all of the ERS information will be available to you, and you can use that to factor that into your thinking about your own proposals. And then later on, the ERS teams will brief the community, as I said. All right, at last. This is why we're here. General observer proposals. These are what you will be submitting. I have 1 disclaimer to make here. The call for proposals exists in draft form, but there are lots of comments and wordsmithing and stuff to go on. So I'm presenting you my understanding of what will be in the call for proposals, which is the official rules. It'll be very helpful for you to hear this, but if the call for proposals says something different than what I tell you today, it's the call for proposals, right? Okay. Here's this timeline again. We'll just go through it again, but now looking at the blue, which is the general observer call for proposals. It'll come out November 30th. You've seen that date before. You'll see it again. And then you have until March 2nd. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 months to prepare your proposals and submit them. This timeline is not shifting. Even though the launch shifted, we're going to do the proposal process as planned. All right? The TAC will meet, and the results will come out in the middle of next year, and we'll know which programs were selected. We'll have the launch. There's a 6-month period after launch for commissioning. It takes 3-4 months for the observatory to cool down to the 40 degrees Kelvin that Pierre told us it needed to be, and then after that, we go through the checkout of the instruments. So that's why it takes so long to do the commissioning. And then science operations begins roughly 6 months after launch. And then only 5 months after that, the cycle 2 call for proposals comes out. And then 2 or 3 months or so after that, the next proposal deadline. So there's that window of several months where the community has to learn what's going on with JWST scientifically and operationally, and then include that information into the cycle 2 proposals. All right, that's the last time we're going to see this timeline in my talk. Okay. For the purposes of the TAC, the general observer proposals are divided into small, medium, and large. This helps you get an idea of how big a proposal, how big a request might actually be. And remember, these are charged time, right? So it's like 25 hours of charged time, like in one of my first slides. Is less than that is a small, 25 to 75 is medium, and then if you go over 75 hours, no exclusive access by default. And that's, again, solely to get that information. If you're going to use that much time in cycle 1, you want to feed that back to the community so that everybody can learn from it for cycle 2. Overall of JWST's lifetime, there'll be a balance in distribution between small, medium, and large. The TAC will decide what the TAC decides, but probably we were guessing they're going to favor a lot of small things to do discovery with only a few larger things in cycle 1. So plan accordingly. If you have a great idea for a large program, go for it. Calibration programs is another category. So we calibrate the instruments up to some standard. Occasionally there are people in the community who have special skills that allow them to calibrate some mode better than we can. So we have a category where they can propose calibration programs. If you're going to do something like this, the last sub-bullet under calibration, you must contact the relevant instrument teams at Space Telescope before you submit the proposal. It'd be a waste of your time, frankly, to try to do this without contacting them. Probably none of you are going to, very few of you are going to work in this category, but if you do, we welcome the help. Just contact us ahead of time to make sure that what you're planning fits in with what we're planning. Finally, there's a special checkbox for long-term. If you're doing something that requires observations over multiple cycles, not because of the amount of time, but because you're doing astrometry or something else that really requires multiple epochs, you check the box. In principle, the TAC can award you time in future cycles as well. Yeah?
So I studied proper motions and shock waves
Mhm.
and supernova remnants. If I calculate that 3 years would be a large enough timeline, like what's the cutoff?
Understand. So the question is, the example was shock waves that take some amount of time. Could it be 10 cycles in the future, or 2 years, whatever? I don't actually know the number to that. I suspect it's no more than 3 cycles, 1, 2, 3, but we'll see what the call for proposal says. And just as a personal viewpoint is, if you can get science out of the first epoch, then I would propose that, because you're probably likely to better to succeed there, and say we will come back later and propose for more. But if you truly can't get a result without multiple cycles, then the TAC will always be faced with that difficulty, and you might as well just ask for the 3 cycles. Yeah.
Is there a fixed amount of time where you need to do calibration or outside the
No, the question was, has some amount of time been set aside for these GO calibration programs? And the answer is no. It comes out of the same pool as everything else, and the TAC will rank it along with everything else. So it has to be pretty compelling, because the TAC tends to be sort of science-oriented. But on the other hand, if you've communicated with us and you can put in the proposal that you've communicated with us X, Y, and Z, that might help. So, all right. Moving on. Thanks for the questions, by the way. There's also a treasury category, which has a big focus on providing data products for the community. And again, no exclusive access. It's a very community-minded proposal category. And we're going to do a category in cycle 1, maybe only in cycle 1, that we're calling survey. And the issue is we don't know how hard it's going to be to fit everything that is accepted into a plan without gaps. And so we're going to accept one category called survey that it exists solely for us to simplify our scheduling life. We can lay out a long-range plan, see where the gaps are, and we can schedule these things in there. So how do we do that? Well, you have to design a program that has targets all over the sky, the observations individually. Observation is that lingo word again. It's the thing you define in APT. Can execute over at least a quarter of the year, which turns out to be means you have almost no constraints other than the field of regard of JWST, keeping the telescope behind the sun shield if you're on the ecliptic. And you have to be able to accomplish your goals with just observing some random subset of the targets in your large target list. So this is an opportunity for certain types of science, and we're doing it to help ourselves, and maybe you guys can come up with some good ideas for that. Archival proposals. So there's a bunch of different types of archival proposals, just all lumped into the phrase archival. There's regular archival proposals, which is to do improve or extend previous analyses. I know it sounds crazy, but we will have regular archival proposals for JWST, and that's because of the ERS program, for example. I mean, if there's some data observations that you know are going to be taken early in the cycle, which the ERS ones, the early release ones will be, you can look at them and say, well, I'm going to analyze them this way, and you should give me money you don't get more data, but you get money if you're at a US institution to do some additional analysis. Obviously, you have to read very carefully what the ERS teams are planning to do and make sure you're not duplicating what they're doing. And there may be other things besides the ERS. I don't mean to be limiting. Perhaps something else will come up, like one of the GTO early data that they're going to release. Legacy, generating homogeneous products out of the archive. I have a little trouble seeing how this is going to be relevant here in cycle 1 of JWST, but it is a category. Probably you're more creative than I am, so it's a category. You can read the details of these descriptions in the call for proposals when it comes out. I'm just giving you the overview to get you thinking. There's a calibration appears again here, but in this case, you don't need any new observations. You're just taking data that you know is going to be in the archive. Here it could be calibration observations that we're planning to take just to calibrate the instruments in a normal way, and you're going to follow up and do something more with those calibration data that we're not. Again, in this category, if you're going to do it, contact us before you go too far down the path of preparing your proposal. Theory, so if, just like for those of you that have done Hubble Space Telescope, they have a theory category. If there's some new theories or models that would help sort of broadly enhance the value of JWST observations, you can propose that. All of these things are going to be judged against taking new data, and they all get judged against each other by the Time Allocation Committee. And finally, there's a community data science software category. At least that's what it's called at the moment. This name might change. And this is an opportunity for the mission, JWST, to fund some of the community software development that goes on that really supports broadly the analysis of data analysis. And so I think this is HST has had this type of thing for 1 year now, and JWST will follow suit. So if you're a real software community supporter kind of person, you should read this category carefully and think about how best to fit into these. In this case, you don't have to be a US PI as long. The PI doesn't have to be in the US, but the funding would only go to US COIs. Finally, the director's discretionary time, I already described 10%, and most of it's going to ERS, no exclusive access, basically repeating myself on this slide. So the Hubble Space Telescope, which we also operate, has some joint programs has had at times and does have joint programs with Chandra or whatever. And you could imagine JWST plus Hubble, and we intend to do joint JWST Hubble times. But in cycle 1, we're not going to formally do that, where the JWST TAC has the power to award time from other observatories. It's just too complicated in cycle 1. Having said that, in your proposals, if you have data from other observatories, or you know you're going to get data from other observatories, and that complements your JWST program, by all means put that in there. The TAC may be influenced by that. It's just that we are not going to organize that coordination in cycle 1. All right? Good. I think because of the way I believe, my guess is yes, but it's not my department, so I can't promise it to you, but it's possible. Yeah, sorry.
Can I ask about the targets of opportunity, like the follow-up, how this will work?
Yeah, I think I have a slide coming up on targets of opportunity, so, and it probably won't answer your question, so then you can ask it at that time. 5 minutes. I don't remember how slides it. So duplication, there's some tricky duplication rules, and I said that part of the motivation for telling you about GTO and ERS was to, did I already go through a slide on targets of opportunity or not? No, okay, good. Just want to make sure you didn't ask because I already showed the slide. So you have to sort of know the duplication rules. The goal is not to protect science. It's to just make sure that we're getting the most science we can out of the observatory. If you're going to observe the same thing twice in the same way, it has to be for a good reason. So if you submit a proposal and it's flagged as a duplicate, you better have put an explanation in the proposal why you're duplicating it, and then the TAC will evaluate that. If you didn't notice it was a duplicate and didn't justify it, you're pretty much doomed. And if you wrote an inadequate, if you didn't motivate the TAC enough, then they'll say no. So the bar is a little higher it's higher if you're trying to duplicate something. So I think that's basically what I said. The TAC will assess it, right? Yeah.
Duplication means exactly the same observing mode.
Yes.
Exactly the same.
That's right. That's right. So that's what it says here is that, it's only, I don't want to digress too much into duplication because it's a dark path, but yes, it's the same mode with roughly the same observing time and so forth. And so the first step is to go see if the target is being observed in the observing mode that you're interested in. And if it is, then you start reading more detail, get your lawyer and read in more details to see what's going on, okay? First, check your target. If the target's not being observed, you're set, right? And then if the target is being observed, is it in the same mode? All right. For imaging, if the field of view overlaps by more than 50%, it gets flagged for duplication. For NIRSpec, which has a multi-object spectrograph, once it's flagged, then we go through and look at the individual targets and see if some of those are duplicates. Some amount of duplication is probably going to happen with a multi-object spectrograph just to use it efficiently. And so this will be handled on a case-by-case basis. In terms of priorities, if it wasn't obvious from the way we went through this, the GTOs got to pick first because they've been in the project for 15 years. Then the early release science people fit in next, and then you guys come after that. And then come cycle 2, the GTOs have to not pick whatever you guys have picked, and then the cycle 2 GOs, and we'll alternate after that. All right. Coordinated parallels, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip because I know Christine has this in her charts. Pure parallels, there's a class of program that you can apply for where you give a science justification and you describe you describe what your exposures will look like, but you don't actually specify, you don't actually say when they're going to happen. And then if your program is approved, later, actually, you will be able to go and attach your exposures as the second instrument to other people's prime observations. And I see that I went through that too fast, but I'm going to ask Christine to ad lib. I know she doesn't have a slide on this, but after she explains the normal coordinated parallels, maybe she could reiterate the pure parallels again. Time-constrained observations. There's a little extra overhead if you say my observation has to be start within this limited time period. And that's because when you force the timing of the observation, you make it harder for us to schedule things. And so we have gaps. And in the total cost to the observatory sense, we pass on the cost of doing your time-critical observation to you. The proposal tool will assess that overhead to you. So it'll just happen. I'm just explaining why it's happening. Targets of opportunity. So there's some transient phenomena that'll happen, and you don't know what the target is yet, and you say to the TAC, if there's going to be a supernova, within 10 parsecs, I want to observe it. And they say, wow, that's a great idea. And so once triggered, we have to rejigger the whole schedule. There's different levels of pain involved with us handling targets of opportunity. If you say, oh, something's happening, but I don't need to, I can give you 2 weeks notice, more than 2 weeks notice, it's really not a big deal. If it's less than 2 weeks, it's a little bit disruptive. It is disruptive, so we're going to limit the number of those in cycle 1. The GTOs are allowed to do 2 of those, and the GOs are allowed to do 6. And if it's less than 3 days, and we really can't do less than 1 day, if it's less than, at least not in cycle 1. If it's less than 3 days, then there'll be a little extra overhead that's attached to your program. But frankly, I wouldn't worry about that. What was your question on overheads? It's done? Awesome, good. This is the speech about cycle 2 and how we want to prepare for cycle 2 by getting as much information as possible out in cycle 1. Yeah, I think I want to save time for questions rather than go through this in detail. And either I pushed the wrong button, or we're done, or I'm out of time. I think I pushed the wrong button because I'd like to put the summary thing back up again. But let me stop there. And if the AV guys could put up the key point slide again, we'll take more questions.
Thank you, Jeff.